Hello, friends. Today I'm going to talk about something for Dungeon Masters, and that is starting a new campaign. I've been doing a new series on my blog at alphastream.org on campaigns and how to run a campaign. It's really mostly modeled towards someone who's run campaigns before, though I will eventually get around to actually saying if this is your first campaign, here are some tips. But I've been looking at the idea that you've been running campaigns and you're looking towards your new one and thinking, how can I shake things up? How can I do it better, differently? Let's find out. So let's start with talking about my website, alphastream.org, because if today is Saturday or Sunday, the 20th or 21st of 2024, you can actually vote for my website on the ENnies. I'm an ENnies nominee. It's really cool. I've never been ENnies nominated before. A lot of my friends have. It's really cool. Thank you to the ENnies. And thank you to everybody who's voted so far. If you haven't, you can still click on my link at alphastream.org to go vote, or just go straight to the ENnies nomination. I've got a post all about it, and you can see how to go to this website here and vote for myself for best online content and all the other awesome nominees. But check out my website, which is really what this video is about, because I've been creating a new series all about running campaigns and a series of blog articles walking through it. And I'm going to walk through some of the initial themes on this very show. And we will start by just kind of giving you a quick tour of the website in case you've never been there. Maybe you don't even know that I have a website. You just know me through Success in RPGs or Neverwinter videos or other things like that that I do on the video side. But I really, really love blogging, and I've been doing it for many, many years. And on this blog, you kind of get to see the latest things up at the top. And then you can see all the other types of blogs that I've covered in the past. So take a look at the website if you like at alphastream.org. You can also find some free things there, like there's a spreadsheet for tracking miniatures, and there's a free adventure, and you can subscribe for updates to get even more free stuff, and even support me on Patreon for yet more free things. Well, I guess it's not free. You get it free with supporting me on Patreon. Thank you. But what we're going to do today is we're going to dig into the start of the series on campaigns and going to look at how we can begin a new campaign. And I want to start by thanking MT Black, an awesome creator who actually reached out to me a while back and said, hey, you've been talking about campaigns here and there on various Discords. What if you kind of did a series on it? And I thought about it, and I started making notes as I would launch campaigns and finish campaigns. And that's really where this whole series came from. So thank you to MT Black. Check out his awesome work. And really, when it came to doing this series, kind of two things came together. One is that on the Mastering Dungeons podcast, which I co-host with the awesome Sean Merwin, we were looking at the idea of creating actually a campaign and what kind of elements go into the world building aspects and sort of preparing for the characters aspects of this. So you can also check out our series on Mastering Dungeons. And in fact, there are links on my blog to the episodes that are sort of relevant as they've come up. So check that out. The second thing I did was really go through a number of recent campaigns and think through what had worked and what I do personally that lends itself to awesome campaigns. So here we go. The first thing is the end. Yeah, that's right. We resurrect from the ashes of our old campaign into the new one, drawing great unearthly necromantic power, or something kind of like that. But really what it is that we can add, as our previous campaign is ending, and again, I'm assuming you're not a new GM for this particular episode, you are running a campaign, and towards the end, you are working really hard on wrapping up all of your plots, kind of coming up with the cool things. But it's good to pause and stop and say, okay, when this campaign ends, I'm going to want to launch another one. And it makes a lot of sense to learn from this one. So the first step is actually let's pause as we reach the end of that campaign and think through what it is that we're enjoying and not enjoying, and what's left to do, what is creatively out there for you, for your players. And so here are a list of questions that I talk about on the blog that I go through. It's kind of my personal checklist for the end of my campaign, that I break this out and I start writing this down in just a Word document or a piece of paper, whatever you like to do. Think through what really worked in this campaign, what I want more of for the future, what new techniques did I either try that I should carry forward, or did I hear about but didn't get to implement, right? Things that I didn't get to try, but I meant to, and I sure want to make sure that I do that in a future campaign. And then the things to avoid, right? I tried this particular technique. It did not work at all, right? I tried a new way to do hex crawling and it was subpar, right? Or I did something to surprise the characters and they did not enjoy that, right? So that goes on my list of avoids. To add a little more to this, right? With what worked, I'm often looking at the bigger things that I did, like changes in how I run or systems, right? There are things that work that I just do all the time, right? Ways that I say, like, handle skill checks or make combat exciting. Those are things that work that I just do, right? I don't need to write those down. But it's really things like, for example, when I ran Tomb of Annihilation, I've shared how I was essentially testing, and you can see it kind of over, no, this way, there, that guy, the Acquisitions Incorporated book. I was working on that book, and I did that with the Tomb of Annihilation campaign, coming up with how could the players run an organization while they are playing Tomb of Annihilation so that they can accomplish all of their goals, even though they're off in the jungle or deep in some dungeon, that they can still be doing the things they set out to do in the campaign through a business entity, through an organization, a faction they run, something like that. And that really worked, right? So now, whenever I'm running a campaign, one of the things that's on my checklist is, should the players have a way to run some organization? Maybe they own a tavern where they gather secrets. Maybe they are part of a merchant group and are selling things. Maybe they simply have a mobile base that can travel with them, right? Different things that work. I want to keep that in mind. And so after the Acquisitions Incorporated, or after my Tomb of Annihilation campaign, I thought, yeah, I want to keep experimenting with this because it worked so well and gave them greater agency in the world, right? Or when I ran my Blade Runner campaign, there were various props that they give you with the adventures that come from Free League, the company that makes the Blade Runner RPG. And wow, those really worked. And so the idea of having physical props, just printouts, right, that I can give and say, here's this thing you find at the scene of the crime, or study this picture for clues, really, really works. And so I make a note that says, at the end of my campaign, I make this note that says, next time, if I can do some physical props, that's great, right? Like things like coins, campaign coins, I've often said no to them because I don't really think I'm going to use actual gold pieces that everybody has. But a coin that's a clue, that can be really cool to hand out, right? Or a couple of coins that represent some puzzle solution they will get to later. That could be really neat, right? So that kind of physical props can be an example of something that works that I decide to do. It could be a way I used miniatures and terrain that I'd never done before, right? Some sort of way that they could work across a different landscape to make it really interesting and exciting. Whatever it is that's different than your typical thing that you do, we're making a note of, we're saying next campaign, I'm going to do that. Wanted more of sounds similar, but it's maybe where we say, okay, we created in the campaign, we really looked at how I could, as DM or GM, get players to create their own goals in play. And so I may have found ways to get them to do their particular things in the campaign, but I'm still working on that, right? I want more of that. So I want to keep working on ways that I am encouraging the players to come up with big schemes in the world. This is something that often is on my list, right? Like I'm continuing to perfect that. And so I want to make a note of that. My next campaign, I want to keep working on what it is that drives the players having these great goals that are really their own, not the adventures, not my campaign settings, but things that they come up with. So that's an example of a almost like subsystem, right? An approach that I really want more of. Another example could be actually in the picture that's right below me, which comes from a Dwarven Forge setup that I used in a campaign where I ran through the Dungeon of Doom. When we did that, I had in Dungeon of Doom kind of alternate mechanics for how you refresh your capabilities. So they couldn't take long rests, but when they found certain items, that allowed them to get aspects of resting back. And so this made it really cool for them to want to get those items that gave them that benefit. And you can theme that into whatever, right? It could be shards of a soul. It could be special plants that are in a jungle. It could be any number of things, right? And as you're recovering these things, finding these things, that gives you resting. And so you can space it out really nicely so that it's quite challenging and helps them, right? I also did things like have attunement for magic items that were available in the Dungeon of Doom be instantaneous. So you didn't have to take a short rest because there's no real resting, right? So that was really helpful, right? You are getting recharge, you're getting the ability to have a magic item tied to you immediately, right? That really takes away from the need for a short rest and further buys into this concept of like, get through these rooms quickly, accomplish things, get the next thing, because this is all helping you to succeed in this dangerous situation. New techniques are also really interesting. This is situations where we really played with a new approach. Like maybe we borrowed from Fate's aspects, something that we talk about a lot on Mastering Dungeons, and I've talked about on my blog a lot, where we said, okay, this time I started a campaign by saying, all right, let's define some aspects of the world. I'm going to propose some things, but you maybe add some additions to it, right? And in Fate, you have these aspects that they're kind of big, well, short but important phrases that tell us what the world is, right? And so we might say, and I've mentioned this on the blog, but I played in a campaign for the Dresden Files where we came up with these together, and we said, and we were actually defining the city of Portland, where I live, Portland, Oregon. And we said, okay, what would we describe in sort of this fantasy world? And we said things like, the forest that is part of the city, it's all about the Fae there. We said labor is hairy, right? So like werewolves and creatures like that, they're like the dock workers and the taxi cab drivers. Like there's a lot of this, and mundane people don't know this, but that's true. And then the city is run by wizards, right? So these kinds of aspects, and in fact, quarreling wizards, right? That, as you describe this out loud with the players buy into this, right? They really, I still remember them. And this was many years ago. So that's a technique that often I've written down at the end of a campaign. It's like, oh, I got to do more of this, right? This was really a game-changing thing, literally. So those kinds of new techniques that you can pull out of a different game and into another one, right? Maybe you play an RPG like Dragonbane and you look at like how they handle resting and skills, the way skills increase, which is also kind of in Call of Cthulhu. Maybe that's something you want to try in your game, right? Did you use a skill and did you either succeed or fail? Maybe either succeeding or failing drives the ability to get better at that skill in the future. That could be a fun technique to try out, a fun new mechanic that drives play in kind of an interesting way, gets people to use their skills differently than they do currently. We could also have new techniques that we didn't use, but we heard of, right? And this kind of gets into our next situation. Things we didn't get to try, right? So maybe we learned, we read a blog article about using Fate aspects and thought, wow, that's great, but didn't use it in our campaign, couldn't kind of go back and fit it in, or any of these kinds of ideas that we often, if you're reading a lot on the internet, there's some really neat ideas. And so jotting those down and saying, next campaign, if it fits, I want to try this, right? I want to have ship-to-ship combat, whether it's spaceships or chariots or anything in between, right? I want to try that. And I heard that Esper Genesis has these great rules for it. So I want to go out and grab that and try that, right? Or maybe like there was a time that I was running Acquisitions Incorporated for my son when he was in middle school. And I kind of thought, we're going through these portals already and exploring kind of neat scenes. What if I take him to Star Wars? I wrote a blog on this, which we were talking about on my Discord the other day. Okay, let's take him to the world of Star Wars, and in fact, end up with like the classic scene of running away from Darth Vader as he's smashing through things and tearing people apart. He's coming for you. Can you escape in time? And we did this really neat thing. And finding the way to use Esper Genesis so it created a Star Wars experience was really rewarding. And led to the kids really enjoying it. In fact, they were like, can I stay and train with Leia and all these kinds of neat ideas, right? And so that was a thing that I tried, but maybe I want to try more of that, right? I didn't get to try everything that I could have. It was a very short experience. And so I actually might put that on my didn't get to fully try or want more of because it was so good that it's worth doing again. Like, how can I take being in the right RPG where you can go into another RPG, right? And it doesn't have to be fully that. Like, as you can see, but I was running a 5e game. I used Esper Genesis, which is a sci-fi RPG variant, instead of using Star Wars mechanics, right? If I'd done something like Edge of the Empire or the old Star Wars saga or even the D20 Star Wars, that would have been a whole new, very different mechanical set. So by using Esper Genesis, it felt very familiar and made it easy, right? And I've done some things long ago like that, where I took Star Wars or D&D into Shadowrun, right? So that can be the kind of thing like, all right, I got to try that again list. Something that's always on my didn't get to try list is the many kinds of approaches towards exploration. And so I end up trying a few, but I always have more that I want to try. What if I did random encounters this way? What if I did wilderness travel this way? What if I did uncovering hexes this way? And so I often have a mix of more of new techniques and didn't get to try off of outdoor exploration. Something that's often on my didn't get to try list is variations on schedules for event-driven games. So situations where events are driving things, and it can be something that plays off of the concept of fronts, or the idea that enemies, villains have a particular schedule they're doing things. I don't try enough of that, and it's often on my list of, what if on certain timelines things are going to happen, events are going to happen, and the characters properly know about that but react to it, right? This is an example of the kind of thing that often I have on my didn't get to try list. Last is avoid. So sometimes in a campaign we have something happen that just didn't go well, and we want to make a note that we don't want to do that. Or maybe it's something we've just done too much, right? Like I just ran a lot of sci-fi, and so I'm avoiding sci-fi. Or maybe I'm avoiding crossovers. I just did a crossover, so I'm definitely not doing that from going from fantasy to sci-fi. I'm going to step away from that. I've been doing too much horror, so I'm going to get away from that and avoid that. Dark grim has been too much, so I'm going to move away from that, right? Those kinds of lists of things we can avoid can be things that really we don't like, or just things we've done a lot of we need a break from, and we want more of something else instead. And it's worth saying that I often don't dwell too much on what to avoid. I look at GMing like I look at most of my life, which is that failure is fine. You're going to fail at some things. You're going to have some bad sessions. And so I don't really worry too much about kind of what didn't work or what went poorly. I focus on what I want to do, but sometimes it can be worth it to have a few things in this category that we kind of remind ourselves, like, let's not do that. One of the lessons I had big time, long time ago, is at the end, I had one of the characters reveal that they're an enemy and kind of capture everybody, like just sort of by DM fiat, but through a player. And boy, they all felt like it really robbed them of agency. Even the character doing it, that player did not enjoy it. So I, learned really from that. After that, it was kind of in my brain the whole time, like, okay, I'm not doing that again. That did not work. So the next thing we want to do is sort our ideas, right? We've gone through and thought through all these things. We've been keeping a list as we're ending our campaign. And now I want to take all of those ideas, which are often just, for me, scribbled on the end of session notes and things like that. And I write them up. I do it, in a Word document, but you could use whatever tool you like to organize it into a better cohesive fashion. And what I like to do is sort these things into things like campaign concepts. So these are the major concepts that I'm thinking about as a result of these questions I've asked myself in the previous step. So I might think like, and as you can see here, I'm reading from my blog, might be player-focused space exploration, or having PCs run a business. I may have, on one hand, ideas for an urban intrigue campaign, and on the other, exploring remote wilderness that come from these things I wanted to do more of and explore more of, or things that were of interest to me and the players. And I'm going to get to refine these more and choose from them, but I'm just kind of pulling them all together. So this is an example here from one of my campaign lists. I want to steal 13th Age's concept of icons and use them for factions. Establish a home base they come back to, care about, and build up. Threaten what they love, but they come out stronger for it. Make sure they have big dreams or goals that they can realize. Explore wilderness and find important things, right? So these are kind of things that I think, this is the kind of stuff I want in my next campaign. The next category is around approaches to play. These are changes where we want to think about how we're going to run the game. And it can be things like, for example, I've written blogs about table tents with character art on them, where you have every character with kind of their art representing them on it. So we see always, when we're looking at that player, we see who their character is, and we see their name and maybe some descriptor about it. And maybe I'm even doing that for some NPCs. It might also be techniques around NPCs, like having fewer of them or more compelling ones, right? These approaches to play can help everybody, right? Like maybe after every session, I'm going to put my notes together and share them with all the players, right? That's something I started doing a few years ago, and I've kept doing that. It's been really valuable, even just for me, to make sure that I fully remember what happened in a session, right? But also for the players who want to look at that, those players that really care about the details and what are the things to do. And I do things like in my notes, I will bold the names of NPCs and places, and I will highlight mysteries and questions, right? So there's some utility to it for the players if they're smart and care to be motivated enough to look at that. Things like getting everybody on Discord afterwards for post-session discussion or whatever other place where, you kind of continue, the game ends, but you get a little bit of opportunity there to air some things out, talk about things, and maybe push it forward, can be a neat approach to play. An interesting topic, and I've seen this before on blogs, where you take character art for NPCs and you kind of give them a few, like show 3 examples and say, all right, the bartender, kind of this rugged individual, which of these 3 do you want it to be? That can be really interesting. It does break some immersion, so not all players like this, but if they do, it makes the NPCs really memorable, right? The other thing you could do is just put out some faces and say, hey, which of these look interesting? And then I'll reveal who they are later. That's a variant that maybe doesn't break the immersion as much, but that can be a fun approach that you bring in. For plots and story arcs, the ideas that we have for story aspects that can go into a larger campaign can be really useful. I'm going to do a whodunit mystery. I'm going to explore the elemental planes to recover a lost item and really play with this idea of elements and what happens when the elements combine. That could be really cool. Bargains with the devil, right? I've been watching the Ack Inc. adventures, and boy, there's so much of that would be cool to bring into my games. Maybe a particular type of NPC, patron, or faction, and things like revealing the villain's plots, little layers at a time, right? That can be a fun idea for plots and story arcs. I'm going to have a dungeon crawl as part of my adventure, right? That can be a goal that we can have towards this sort of story arc of play. I'm going to have a villain they can defeat early and one that gets away, right? So a little bit of reward, a little bit of frustration that gets payoff later when they finally confront them. Have 1 to 2 sessions where darkness really matters. I've often enjoyed doing that in campaigns. Like your torches suddenly are barely giving off any light, just the square right around you. So what do? Do you light more torches? Do you know how to handle that? You cast a spell and the same thing is true. It's like no light's being generated. There are all these dark areas and monsters are making the most of it. That can be a lot of fun. Encounter concepts. So things like, as we're creating adventures, often we will in a campaign, in our previous campaign, we'll be coming up with all these ideas and we kind of don't quite do what we wanted to do. And we think, I've still got this itch for a concept, right? So like, one I love, a monster is trying to stop a trap, and that trap will hurt everyone, not just the player characters. So what do? Do you help them? Do you fight the monster? Do you do both at the same time, right? And that can be a really fun situation. I am not done exploring that. I keep trying to play with that because it's so much fun. This is one that's on my list. A froghemoth or some other creature like that has swallowed something. And usually these monsters have a rule that when you get hit, they spit whatever's in there up. And it's often, one of your party members. But what if it's the thing they ate right before you showed up? So it hits you, you hit the creature, the player characters do, it regurgitates a new enemy, and that enemy joins the fight, initially maybe just attacking anybody, but could be swayed one way or the other. And rent-free living in my life in my brain is every idea that's ever been in an Indiana Jones or especially Raiders of the Lost Ark movie. These are just always there. Things that I'm going to use, right? I've used multiple rope bridges for encounter concepts that you can cut or, jump across or swing off vines to kind of shortcut. Vehicles crashing together that you can go from one to the other and be run over or climb back on. Those kinds of things are just constantly, that I use. And then just anything else that doesn't fit the above, but that you make a list of. And as I said, on Mastering Dungeons, we talked about various different topics. So you can see here some of the topics that we did: world building tips and tricks, building and changing rules to fit your RPG world, designing an RPG starting village, designing an RPG starting adventure, and a starting encounter. So these different episodes, you can find all links to them on alphastream.org. and make the most of that. I hope this has been helpful. Let me know how you feel about my covering previous blog posts like this. I plan to do the rest of the campaign series and kind of talk through them. If it's helpful to you, give me a shout out. If you'd like me to tweak some things, let me know that as well. And again, if the ENnies are still available for voting, I would greatly, greatly appreciate your vote. Thanks so much for supporting this channel and all of my Alphastream.org efforts. Thanks. If you like success in RPGs, I hope that you'll consider joining our Patreon community. There, you can be part of our Discord community. We discuss the latest happenings in the industry. We share each other's work and progress. We analyze what is taking place in the hobby and look at the latest products and events. I hope also that you'll come join me on alphastream.org, join the mailing list. You get a free product for joining, and you can see all that I've been creating lately. Thanks so much for supporting my work.